Welcome, and thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Sitecore Water Cooler, the casual conversation podcast dedicated to covering all things related to Sitecore product updates, full site builds, suggestions and insights, getting the most out of your Sitecore investment, and more. I'm your host, Jon Price, Sitecore Practice Director and MVP at AmericanEagle.com. To set the stage for today and piggybacking off a few of our previous episodes, the digital world's changes have been accelerated by the events of the past 1.5 years. The trends include employees to work remotely or at least some type of hybrid, B2B customers now expecting to not have to interact face-to-face for orders and reorders. The world has simply gone the way of more touchless and faceless interactions, which obviously greatly influences how companies need to adapt their digital web properties and strategies for helping their customers, prospects, and employees on how to digest content and to purchase products. Enter platforms like Sitecore, Salesforce, and others that have capabilities for content, personalization, and A/B testing. However, they all have similar gaps in their stack, which is search, machine learning, and chatbots. With these digital changes occurring, more functions are going to need to be accessed digitally. Organizations need to address the gap so relevant content can be found. We know roughly 1/3 of website users are categorized as searchers. To address this gap of search and machine learning in these tech stacks, today we're going to talk specifically about a technology that is a leader in this arena on the Magic Quadrants, Coveo. Coveo is a fantastic option to become the solution to address the gaps of the digital experience platforms in organizations' technology stacks. I am very excited for today's episode as I am joined at the water cooler by JC Dumont from Coveo. I have had the pleasure of working with JC during his tenure at Coveo. JC works with Coveo as an account executive and has been with Coveo for 5+ years. JC has more than 10 years of experience in the vast field of IT, having specialized in website search projects on numerous platforms including Sitecore. At Coveo, JC first focused on Sitecore customers and helping them achieve success, followed by a recent switch to the world of sales, which he now focuses on helping people solve problems and use cases on a daily basis. JC, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, John.
Great. And JC, I know we have worked together for quite a while. We're both very familiar with the Coveo as a product. But, JC, for those that are not familiar with Coveo, tell us a little bit more about the product and how organizations can leverage it.
Sure thing. At Coveo, we actually consider ourselves a relevance platform and not just a search engine. And the way that our mission is really to convey the right information to the right people at the right time. Often we also say that we like to democratize the Google or the Amazon level of experience you get from search, but also other types of interactions. And search is definitely a mean to an end for us to achieve this purpose. We've developed different ways, different channels to convey this information over time. Including recommendations. You've talked about chatbots, other ways like that. So it goes to our core mission is really around that relevant experience and information sharing. We've been in business for about 16 years at this point. We started up with enterprise search, so mostly around employee portals, intranets, focusing on integrating SharePoint content. And we've evolved over time to grow and expand our offering to other areas. Example with our Coveo for Sitecore product, which we're going to talk a bit about today. Salesforce, we're not the system of engagement per se, but our purpose is to connect the dots between each one of them and to essentially, again, offer that rich search and recommendation experience to the end user in an admin-friendly interface and platform.
That's great. I definitely think you guys have the distinct challenge, especially when clients that are on Sitecore or searching for a DXP platform, their C-levels are always like, hey, we want Google. And that's a pretty tall challenge to be up against. Yep. So it's interesting, especially when they've already purchased a platform like Sitecore or Salesforce, right? These aren't cheap platforms, right? They have a very tall licensing cost per year, which kind of leads me into the first topic for today, which is Coveo has these specific use cases on platforms like Sitecore. So why would an organization choose Coveo over, say, like Solar on Sitecore?
The reality is that a lot of clients actually try out search on their own with Solar and other open source solutions because a lot of people think that search is very easy to accomplish. We don't really think about search that often when deploying a massive project, and that's okay. We understand that we're a piece in an overall bigger portrait that is a full Sitecore implementation. But essentially, in many instances, we're looped in when people realize that they're sitting on a vast amount of information, and the quantity of information is not so much the problem in the end. It's really to establish what's relevant, what's important for the end user, considering their context, the language they speak, all the areas around personalization. And when you take all of this into account, sorting this out and establishing the logic and the search engine becomes a lot more complicated. And this is where I would say an open source solution like Solar can show limitations. And first of all, making accessible all the content that people want to expose, but also understand what's relevant, because relevance is a subjective concept. Something that's relevant for me as an end user is not going to be necessarily relevant for you as a customer. So how do you address that with hardwired rules and logics that's established beforehand, all those manual ranking rules? It's very difficult to do that and to think ahead of everything you need to account for. And this is where our machine learning technology helps and can show a lot of value to those customers in search of a better search experience. Essentially, Coveo captures out of the box all the behavioral activity happening around search and navigation. So the clicks, the queries, page views, and all of that, to understand how people are interacting with the information presented to them, and understand what's a good experience, what's a successful search journey, for instance. And thanks to that data captured and the machine learning working with that set of data, we're able to say, well, a lot of people are actually clicking on the result that's on the second page when they're searching for this, or they're clicking on the first recommendation presented to them in that context. So maybe I should try to promote that on a global scale, all in the optic of replicating as much as possible successful outcomes without human interaction. And that's the beauty of it all, is that our clients don't need to be aware of that problem, quote unquote, in order to fix it. Machine learning detects it automatically and will implement a solution seamlessly, sometimes even without our clients being aware of it.
Yeah, one thing I want to hit on real quick as well that you mentioned at the beginning, JC, which is a really good point, is, with solar, it is more of a coding solution. And, the market and just reality with digital right now is everything's going to more of low code, configuration. So with Coveo, if we just take like a simple listing page, a marketer can simply go in there after it's set up, add a new page, determine what content type comes back, configure their facets. They can even configure all their business rules all by themselves without developers. So I think that's probably, just on the outset of a project is a huge benefit to simply even just limiting the level of effort on a project, right? It's just putting the power in the marketer's hands. So I think that was a really good point you made there.
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of companies are trying to find the best of each solution. We see that a lot with different headless solutions coming in, or more I would say segmented solutions that we see out there, and be able to put all of that together to get the best of each category. I think that Coveo is a leading solution for everything around search, and Solar is not a bad solution per se, but a lot of our clients are coming to us and saying, I don't want to be a search expert. I don't want to invest the time and energy to build this expertise from scratch and manage all of this manually, right? It goes down to focusing on your strengths. For example, I don't know, selling shoes or whatever service our clients are in, and delegating this important part of the user experience to, I think, a solution that's been proven to work well for the last 16 years. But it's definitely a matter of good or bad fit. We think that we're a good fit in those types of instances where, people need that relevant experience, have vast amount of information, and need to augment search capabilities on their website.
Yeah, and even expanding on that, JC, if we, when we talk about, letting, the marketers and these teams scale, I think the one thing we haven't mentioned yet is Coveo actually has the distinct capability of tracking each individual unique user, what they've searched for, what they've clicked on before and after, and, you can even add custom actions like when they added things to their cart. Pair that with Sitecore's experience profile and XDB, where Sitecore's keeping track of all the other information. You can marry the two up and have a really powerful platform. But you did mention something else I want to hit on too is, organizations don't want to become search experts, right? So with all this data you're collecting, Coveo is actually behind the scenes, taking all this information into account. Then for the front end user, you're manipulating the order of the search results to provide more relevance results for the end user, which is extremely powerful, right? So it's great to have that running behind the scenes. You'll definitely get more ROI and conversions by having your just out of the box, I'll say, algorithm running. But marketers do have the ability to manipulate that themselves. So some really good points there, JC.
Yeah, that's right. And it goes back to one of the key value proposition we have is to kind of put more power in the hands of marketers, which I think aligns really well with what Sitecore as a CMS does as well, right? The ones who want to control and give a specific user experience, tweak relevance in certain ways. With open source solutions like Solar, it can become difficult to do that by themselves without, a computer science degree or an IT department heavily involved in this operation. So we try to put that into, again, a business friendly interface so that, with drag and drops, with different tools directly in the platform, we can really empower this type of user to do a lot by themselves without having to submit a request to IT every single time they want to change something.
Yeah, it simply just gives the teams the ability to scale. And I'll go on a bit of a tangent here, especially I've been on the services and project side of things. I think you hit the nail on the head. Like these projects, the search piece of the project especially are typically left to the end. And when we talk about a lot of sites are 20 to 40% search heavy from the global search bar. Roughly we say a third are searchers. That's a huge aspect to leave to the end of the project. So for the listeners out there, if you have a project or about to embark on a project like this, like a digital transformation or site redesign, planning for search at the beginning is definitely well recommended. And then especially pairing that with a tool like Coveo would definitely be very powerful.
I think that, as individuals, we're quite shaped up by the way we interact with organizations in our personal lives. So you, for instance, I'm sure you've bought something on Amazon, especially over the last year and a half, right? So what do you do when you land on Amazon? The first thing you do is not navigate around and try to click on different promotions. Sometimes, yes, perhaps, but personally, when I go on there, I've got a very specific idea of what I want to purchase, and search is the one thing I use when I land on that website. Same thing can be said with other platforms, or even Google for that matter. So I think our expectations as consumers is also reflected in the corporate world, where I do want to use search as well when I land on a client website or any other website where I need to do business. Of course, we're biased, we're a search company, but people having a rich search experience definitely allows you a lot more control and allows you to bring the experience on par with the expectations people have around what Google have done, what Amazon have done.
No, for sure. And, all this talk of shoes and commerce and Amazon, that does lead me to another topic I wanted to talk about today with you, JC. And, I've been noticing Coveo's been making large investments and just simply resourcing and capabilities into the commerce space. So let's talk a little bit about, and maybe you can tell me a little bit about, some of the capabilities, e-commerce clients can leverage from Coveo.
You're right. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we started off as an enterprise search company. Over the years, we saw the applicability of our solution in other areas such as e-commerce. It's actually a great time for our solution to explore that area, given that a lot of people have been forced because of the pandemic and everything to refocus their business model around a more digital experience, getting a bit away from the traditional brick and mortar channels. And so we've developed basically a way to address that market and to have a product that's specific to the imperatives of an e-commerce project. Giving you an example of a couple of features that we've developed, but a catalog manager becomes something that's quite essential in e-commerce. When you have something on the informational side for a traditional website, I would say you have one version of a document, and that's mostly it. I'm giving you an example around the shoe store. Again, if you have an e-commerce shoe store, you might have different variants of the same type of shoe. So, and what about pricing? Maybe you have a special member account that gives you a discount on everything. We need to be compliant with that and respect pricing entitlements, which we do now. Availability of product. This pair of shoes is sold in this specific mall, but not in this other one. So a lot of nuances have come up that we needed to address. We now do. We have a Coveo for commerce specific product, which can actually be merged with other types of solutions like Coveo for Sitecore and Salesforce. It gives you a new flavor to our solution. And I think that we were able to align quite well with the business objectives of the clients in this area, namely around improving conversion, average order value, the ability to self-service, lowering cost of supporting clients online, and so on. So that's what's been going on in the last few months and years around e-commerce at Coveo.
That's great. I think the timing for you guys especially has worked out well. And, with the times we're in, there's a lot of companies now going direct to consumer. Maybe they've been historically B2B, and now they're going direct to consumer, and they need, what all tools do we need in their stack? And I definitely think there's some other features I wanted to mention as well. If you have things like color swatch, right? And users are typing in red and maybe your color is rose, your platform can definitely help the user match to what they're exactly looking for. And even like with the B2B manufacturers, there's a lot of data issues with those types of clients and their type of catalogs. And, even like things like matching inches with IN to inches to maybe two parentheses, those are some very powerful things that can help users find what they're looking for without setting up manual rules, basically to get them to the product they're looking for. So definitely some very powerful pieces there.
Absolutely. And one thing I've personally learned across my years of working with e-commerce is the nuances between B2B and B2C, which, Initially, getting any e-commerce can seem like a single big entity, but I think you'll agree that they have different specificities, different ways of working, different types of users. So interested to have your take actually on that. What's your biggest point around what's specific to B2C versus B2B? What have you seen with clients on your site, for instance?
The one interesting thing is we have more and more clients that are both B2B and B2C now, where you have to address the needs for both personas, we'll say. So one interesting way we've leveraged Coveo is a client I'm thinking of, a very large association that, sells training to organizations, but maybe selling books or individual products to consumers, is we now need to be able to identify both groups. I think the one thing that the Coveo product does very well is matching individual users to what other people like them have done. So for example, we have a user that comes to the website, they've added 2 products to their cart, and then eventually they leave, right? The next user that comes and follows that very similar journey, we can start promoting and making product recommendations and start manipulating. And Coveo itself is actually doing the manipulation of like-minded products that they can buy or should buy. So what we've been seeing is everyone should go through the methodology of, creating your personas, creating the conversions they need for both groups. But I think the Coveo product specifically on these search pages, especially these listing pages, does a very unique and good job of being able to identify what products and what type of product bundling goes with each other.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying, because we're actually seeing a lot of differences around exactly that in B2C versus B2B. In my experience, B2C tends to be anonymous users getting in, not authenticating themselves, maybe going in to purchase one solution, and then you're not going to see them again for maybe a year and a half, but a vast quantity of profiles and people getting in, Whereas B2B, we tend to see a bit more repeat business, people that need to log in, very specific entitlements, specific discounts given for types of profile and so on. In the first instance, elements like machine learning are critical, because first of all, you have no other ways of driving relevance without properly authenticated users. We can only rely on the wisdom of the crowd to understand what has been done across the entire customer base and try to do an educated guess around what should be interesting for this specific user based on that. Whereas with B2B, I think it's interesting because we're able to comply, of course, the entitlements of each specific users, but we're able to address relevance for example, for this subset of user. So, I'm a large distributor getting in, logging in your portal. What did others in my exact situation have done as well? And try to address relevance perhaps a bit more specifically to my profile.
Yeah, those are all really good points. And, talking about on the authenticated user, I mean, especially with the past year and a half, the need for portals and self-services come up a lot. And if we do have a login, we do have what we call a known user, explicit, versus an unknown user, which is implicit. If we have that explicit user, we can create things like gated content and, even unique content on a search page or a listing page, like customer specific pricing. So we can all configure that through your platform. So it's all extremely handy to have, especially with now where organizations are going, which is more the self-service known model.
That's right. Beyond the features themselves, what's been positive about this all is the impact, the business impact of having good self-service, for example. It's kind of weird to say, but the ability to find easily content on the website by oneself is seen to have a direct impact on how expensive it is to serve those users in terms of support, access to information, and so on. If we do the simple exercise of saying, well, if a client goes on the website, searches for something, tries to go around, cannot find what they're looking for, they're going to end up calling you in some way or contacting you at the very least via support portal or a hotline or whatever. And those can become really expensive to manage. It can be $100 a call plus, depending on the nature of your business. Whereas self-servicing with just robust search and good information presented to them on a website is perhaps a couple of cents per call. So very rapidly, you see that the concept of case deflection or being able to serve that information rapidly and efficiently is yielding a lot of gains on the business side as well, just thanks to good information sharing.
For sure. And one other thing I was going to ask you is, other new use cases you are seeing? So you mentioned case deflection, which is a super interesting one. We have a lot of clients, and there's a lot of clients out in the space that are both Sitecore and Salesforce. So can you maybe expand on that Salesforce piece with case deflection and how that has been basically morphed with your product?
Yeah, absolutely. We've created a product with our technology partner Salesforce a couple of years ago, and have actually explored a variety of use cases depending on the solution our clients are using. One of the most popular ones, I would say, is Salesforce Service Cloud and Community Cloud, in which Coveo is actually able to provide value on both sides of the funnel, essentially. On one side,